listening to the radio during the first night of the nuclear war. The alert tones hit in the middle of a call-in about diesel prices and winter wheat, and for maybe 2 seconds I figured somebody at the state level had pushed the wrong button again. It was close to midnight. The roads around here were mostly truck lights and deputies going county line to county line, and I was halfway through a plain overnight shift with stale coffee, a humming board, and the kind of quiet you only get in farm country after the bars close. Then the tone held too long. Not the short local weather interruption. Not a monthly test. The machine in the rack opened the relay by itself, and the voice that came after it had that stripped-down federal wording nobody uses unless something is actually wrong. Emergency action notification. Presidential message pending. This is not a test. The hair on my arms went up before my head really caught up. I remember staring at the red light over the channel strip and hearing my own mouth go dry. 1 second earlier, I was talking about fuel contracts. Next second, the whole room felt smaller. The phone lines started lighting up before the message had even finished. One line, then another, then all of them. The printer by the wall kicked out a state bulletin full of block text and ugly abbreviations, and right in the middle of it was the one sentence that made it real. Multiple states were reporting missile warning activations. I leaned into the mic and said the only honest thing I had. I told everybody hearing me that I did not know yet if this was a false trigger or the start of something real. But the wording was wrong for a drill and nobody should ignore it. About 20 seconds later, the feed cut back in with another bulletin, longer this time. Still no president, still no calm voice from the top, just relayed instructions and fragments from agencies that sounded like they were trying to stay ahead of whatever was coming in. There were launch detections. There were national defense assets engaged. There were pending attack assessments. None of that means much to normal people at midnight in Kansas until you hear the part about public shelter guidance being distributed by state emergency management. Then, it means everything. I pulled the fader down on the old bumper music before it could restart and locked it there. I remember standing up so fast my chair rolled back into the file cabinet. Out the studio window, the parking lot looked normal. 2 pickups, 1 station van. Sodium light by the side door. Nothing in the sky. No sirens yet. No traffic outside beyond the highway hum in the distance. That almost made it worse, because the room was telling me the country might be coming apart, and the window was telling me it was still an ordinary Kansas night. A man on line 2 from somewhere west of Hayes was already cussing and asking if this was connected to the missile warning that had popped on his phone while he was driving. A woman in Salina was crying and asking if she should wake her kids. A trucker outside Junction City said the eastbound lanes on the interstate were suddenly filling up with people driving way too fast for the dark. I grabbed a legal pad and started writing locations, not because it was organized, just because I needed something my hands could do. I locked the front door from the studio with the little remote latch we used after midnight, and said on air that if you were asleep, wake up the people in your house right now. The next 10 minutes were confusion stacked on top of confusion. Every line carried a different piece of the same bad picture. A cattle hauler on the turnpike said he had heard an emergency tone on 3 stations in a row, and then dead air on one of them. A guy in a pickup near McPherson said his brother in Colorado Springs had texted him 1 sentence and then stopped answering. Somebody from outside Topeka swore there were fighter jets overhead heading west. Somebody else said east. The state bulletin printer kept chattering. One page said, "Maintain monitoring for official instructions." Another mentioned continuity sites and transportation disruption. Another listed preliminary threat conditions with half the words redacted by the formatting because the machine on our end was older than I was comfortable admitting. I had a county map open on the desk and a yellow weather map beside it, and I started doing what people do when the world turns strange. I reached for the familiar tool: roads, wind, towns, water towers, schools, churches with basements, grain co-op offices with concrete walls. Anything that could be turned into a plain sentence for people who needed one. I told everybody flat out not to run outside and stare at the horizon if they heard or saw something. I told them not to burn precious minutes arguing whether the message was fake. If this was fake, they lost 1 bad hour of sleep. If it was real and they wasted that hour, then that was it. That was the whole thing. A man from Ellsworth got through on the 3rd try and said the truck stop there had gone from half empty to jammed in under 5 minutes, and folks were buying water, jerky, cigarettes, batteries, anything they could grab with one hand. I told him not to stay under the canopy by the pumps if more instructions came through. I told everybody hearing me that gas stations were not shelters. Then the first clear statement arrived, and I can still hear the wording because I repeated it so many times that night it burned into me. Confirmed strategic missile launches. Possible inbound warheads affecting continental targets. Additional launches cannot be ruled out. Shelter immediately. Remain tuned for further instructions. That was the line where the room changed. Up to then, I was still holding on to the idea that this could be one broken sensor chain, one cyber event, one ugly false warning, something dramatic but not final. Once I saw confirmed launches in plain language, that was over. I reached over and killed the hall music, the overnight automation, the feed timer, everything that might jump back in and make the broadcast sound normal. I wanted no part of normal anymore. The phones kept hammering. Cell service was still working then, and every scared person in half the state seemed to be either calling family or calling any voice they thought might answer. I told people where I was in broad terms without naming the station. I said I was in central Kansas, and I was staying on air as long as I had power, which I think helped some of them more than any specific instruction did. Ordinary people need a voice that sounds alive. That matters. It mattered that night. Outside, somewhere far off, I heard the first long siren. Not one of ours. One of the town systems finally catching up and starting the civil defense wail they test once in a while and nobody pays attention to anymore. Once that started, the phones changed. Fewer questions about whether it was real. More questions about where to go. I started answering in the simplest way I could because nobody needed speeches. If you had a basement, go there. If you did not, get to the center of the most solid building you can reach in under 5 minutes. Brick school, concrete bank building, county courthouse basement if it is open and you can get there without driving into a jam. If you live in a trailer, get out of it and into a heavier structure. If you are already on the road, stop looking for distance only. Start looking for solid walls and a roof that is not just sheet metal. Do not waste time loading your whole house into the car. Do not spend 20 minutes picking what to save. Grab water, shoes, medicines, flashlights, coats, your people, and move. I said it over and over. A nurse in Hutchinson called and asked if she should try to get to the hospital or stay with her kids. I told her the truth, which was ugly. I said only she knew which duty she could live with if the roads locked up before she made her choice. She went quiet for a second, and then said thank you, in a voice that sounded already tired. A man outside Manhattan asked if Fort Riley would be a target. I said I was not going to lie to him. Active military posts, bomber bases, command sites, ports, major airfields, missile support facilities, they all go on a list in a real nuclear exchange. So yes, if he was close enough to be asking, he needed to think hard about shelter now, not later. He breathed once into the phone and hung up without another word. You could hear people making decisions in real time just from the silence they left. The first power dip hit at 12:07. The studio lights blinked. The board stayed up. The hallway went dark and then came back. I looked through the glass into the control room and saw the backup system indicators flicker from green to amber and back again. That told me the grid was getting hit somewhere, maybe not by weapons yet, maybe just by surge and panic load, and some poor utility operator dealing with half a country doing crazy things at once. I put the maintenance flashlight next to the mic and found the ring with the generator keys, though I already knew where it was. The old emergency binder under the console had tornado pages, ice storm pages, hazmat pages, wildfire pages. It did not have a neat page for this. Nobody makes a clean checklist for civilization getting cut into pieces. I had the police scanner up low in one ear. County units were checking schools, churches, fuel depots, nursing homes. There was confusion even there. Deputies asking dispatch whether the state shelter instruction meant open every public building or wait for county commission authorization. Dispatch did not know. A fire chief in one county asked for clarity on possible blast zones and got told to use best judgment. That is not how high-level emergency management is supposed to sound. You hear best judgment on a flooded creek crossing or a barn fire in high wind. You do not want to hear it when the words strategic missile launches are in the air. I told listeners not to expect a perfect plan to arrive from somewhere else. I said county men and local police were going to be working with scraps and guesswork, same as the rest of us. That was not me trying to scare anybody. It was me trying to stop them from wasting time waiting for a perfect order. A caller from near Wichita said she had just seen multiple aircraft climbing hard out of McConnell. I did not need her to tell me what field she meant. Everybody in Kansas knows where the tanker base is. She said the noise had gone on for several minutes. Heavy engines, one wave and then another. A man farther north near Newton backed her up and said the sky to the south had been busy for half an hour before the alerts even hit public channels. That mattered. It suggested the people who get early warning had already been moving before we heard our first tone. That never makes regular people feel better. It means the clock started before the public was invited into the problem. I kept my voice level and told folks around Wichita, Derby, Andover, and up the line toward Newton that if they were still near windows, they needed to move away from them. If there was a strike on a large airbase, even people well outside the fence line could take glass damage from overpressure, depending on yield, height of burst, terrain, and weather. I did not start quoting blast radii because that turns into a numbers game fast, and bad numbers kill people. I kept it plain. Glass cuts, broken gas lines, fires in attics, shock waves that show up after the flash. People understand that. A trucker south of Salina asked whether he should head west because west felt emptier. I asked what he was driving. He said a refrigerated trailer and half a tank. I told him half a tank in a traffic panic was not freedom. That was maybe 50 bad miles if he got trapped in a line of cars. I told him to find a town with a brick building and get inside. At 12:21, the network relay finally carried an actual human voice from somewhere inside Federal Command. It was clipped and strained, and you could hear paper moving in the background. The man did not waste a word. He said the United States was under strategic attack. He said additional enemy launches had been detected and impact assessments were ongoing. He said public sheltering was necessary nationwide. He said transportation corridors were expected to fail. He said local authorities should preserve continuity, communications, fire response, and medical triage as able. As able. That phrase sat there in the room after the feed cut. As able. It is a phrase that admits there is a version of the night where ability runs out. I read the line back in plain English and told people this meant roads were going to get worse, not better. Already, callers from Interstate 70 were describing stupid driving, shoulder running, people taking median gaps, folks stopping dead under overpasses to call family, near misses around semis, and gas stations with lines out into local roads. A man near Abilene said he had just watched 3 separate wrecks happen within a mile because people were looking at phones and trying to turn around in the dark. I told everybody hearing me that the open road is not a bunker and your car is not a fallout shelter. A car helps you before impact if you know exactly where you are going and the road is open. After that, a car turns into a thin metal box parked in a line with other thin metal boxes. If you were already safe enough to reach a cellar or the center of a courthouse basement, do that. Stop chasing a map in your head from 10 years ago. The first call that made my stomach drop came from a man outside Junction City, voice shaking but trying hard not to show it. He said the gates at Fort Riley had locked down and traffic around the post had turned into a knot. Civilian vehicles were trying to leave. Military vehicles were moving in different directions at once. He said people were leaning on horns and some fool had gotten out with a pistol at one intersection because another driver clipped his mirror. That right there was the most normal American thing in the middle of the most abnormal event I can imagine. Somebody still found time to make it about a mirror. I told him to get off the road and find concrete. He asked if the post itself would draw a strike. I said yes, it was possible, very possible, and I was done softening words for people who wanted a clean answer. He thanked me, and the line dropped. About a minute later, the scanner lit up with county units around Junction City and Chapman, reporting full sirens, uncontrolled traffic, and emergency shelter requests from civilians who had nowhere to go. Then came the first rumor of a flash to the east. Nobody could confirm it. One caller said lightning, another said transformer bank, another said a glow low on the horizon that went away too fast. I did not repeat any of it until I had more than one source. That was the discipline of the job, even with the country falling apart. Panic rides rumor faster than anything. I stuck to what I could put a place name on. The place names started getting uglier around 12:30. Topeka, Kansas City, Omaha, Colorado Springs. No one had full pictures. Nobody had casualty numbers worth trusting. It came in broken. A hospital employee saying landlines were failing. A driver saying the eastern sky had flashed, and then his radio went to static for a few seconds. A county road supervisor near Belleville saying he had lost contact with a sister north of the Nebraska line right after she texted one word: bright. The federal feed carried a brief instruction set about flash blindness and thermal exposure. That told me somewhere somebody had already taken a detonation on U.S. soil, or they were certain one was seconds away. I looked at the studio window without meaning to. That is the dumb instinct. You want to look. I kept myself facing the board and said out loud, mostly to listeners but partly to myself, do not go outside to watch history. History can burn your eyes out. I killed the room's outside monitor feed and shut the blinds over the lobby glass. If something lit off nearby enough to matter, I did not need the front windows helping it. The parking lot still sat under that same yellow light. The stillness of it got meaner by the minute. Every ordinary object in that lot looked temporary. I remember hearing a dog barking somewhere beyond the building and thinking even that sound might be gone by morning. At 12:38, I saw the first real light. It came through the edge of the blind on the east side of the hall and turned the studio wall white for a fraction of a second. Brighter than headlights, brighter than any storm flash, with a hard, clean quality that did not belong to weather. No boom at first. Just the light. Then, maybe 15, 20 seconds later, a low shove of air rolled through the building, and the glass in the outer office chattered in its frames. Not enough to break here. Enough to tell me it was not imagination. I stopped talking for one beat. Just one. Then I said there had been a flash to the east, visible from my location in central Kansas, followed by delayed shock. I said if you were east of Salina, west of Manhattan, anywhere around Junction City, Fort Riley, or the line running back toward Topeka, and you had not taken shelter yet, stop listening and move now. The phones went insane after that. One man in Abilene said his house windows had flexed so hard he thought they would come in. A woman between Chapman and the interstate was screaming that the sky had gone white over the eastern horizon, and then the power dropped. Another caller from near Manhattan never finished a sentence. I heard him say there was a glow, and then nothing but dead line. I cannot tell you what exact target had gone. It could have been the post. It could have been a nearby support site. It could have been something farther east with the light carrying farther than people think nightlight can carry. But the effect on the region was instant. The abstract part of the night ended there. It became a local event. People who had still been debating now knew they were inside it. I switched the broadcast to generator standby right after that because the mains were dropping in and out too fast to trust. That meant going out into the side corridor, keying open the utility panel, and hearing my own boots louder than usual because every other sound in the building had gone thin. The backup system was an old diesel arrangement we kept maintained because storms knock things down out here, and radio men who have seen a blizzard do not trust the grid more than they have to. I toggled the transfer, heard the generator catch on the second crank, and felt the floor take the vibration. When I got back to the studio, the automation computer had frozen, and the phone screener had rebooted into a blue error page. Fine. I did not need fancy. I needed one mic, one console strip, one working transmitter chain, and enough power to keep it alive. I came back on air and told people we were on backup but still broadcasting. That line mattered more than it should have. Men cried just hearing it. A farmer near Linsbourg did not ask for directions or news. He just said, "Keep talking." Then he hung up. Another man from a church basement in Salina said there were already 40 people downstairs, most of them families from small houses with no shelter. And could I repeat the part about fallout because nobody there understood if the danger was over once the blast happened? So I did, slowly. I said blast is one danger, heat is one danger. Falling glass, fire, structural damage, all of that is immediate danger. Fallout is different. Fallout is radioactive dust and debris, and it can come down minutes to hours later depending on where the burst happened and what got thrown into the air. I told him distance, time, and shielding matter. Thick walls matter. Basement depth matters. Staying put matters. Once I started talking fallout, the calls shifted again. People were still panicked, but now the panic had detail. How long do we stay in a basement? Can we drink from the tap? Do we tape the windows? Does shutting the furnace help? If my kid was outside for 10 minutes, is she doomed? I answered straight, and I kept the answer within what I could stand behind. Stay sheltered at least the first full day, unless fire or collapse forces you out. More if official guidance says so. Best place is below ground, or at the center of a large building with dense material around you. Taping windows is not the main issue. Mass between you and the outside is the issue. If your heating or cooling pulls outside air in, shut that intake if you can, and switch to recirculate. If somebody was outside and comes in with dust on clothing, take the outer clothes off and bag them away from living space. Then wash skin and hair with plain soap and water if you have enough. Do not scrub hard. Do not waste good drinking water if you only have a little, but do what you can. Covered food and sealed containers are better than anything left open. A grain shed is not the same as a concrete basement. A ditch can protect from blast fragments if you have seconds. It is not where you stay for fallout. A woman near Great Bend asked if her old root cellar was better than her basement because the cellar walls were dirt and concrete. I told her yes, likely better, if it was dry, stable, and not under anything likely to collapse on top of the hatch. These were not textbook questions. These were ordinary life questions, farm questions, small town questions. And ordinary life was where the night was really happening. At 12:54, the South Line lit up with a caller from north of Wichita. He was on some county road outside Park City, and he was trying to sound calm for whoever else was in the cab with him. He said the southern sky had gone bright in pulses, not one clean flash, and then he saw a rising column farther off where the city should have been. He said he had one kid in the truck and another with his ex-wife in Derby, and he did not know which way to go. I had been dreading Wichita all night because McConnell is the kind of target you do not have to be an expert to recognize. Tanker operations, military airfield, major runway complex, all of it sitting next to a large metro area full of ordinary homes, stores, schools, hospitals, and roads built for daily life, not for this. I asked him where exactly he was, what direction he was facing, whether he had shelter nearby. He said there was a machine shop about a quarter-mile off the road, cinder block, overhead doors shut, maybe empty. I told him to stop driving toward family and start protecting the child in the truck. That was a brutal thing to say, and I knew it, but sending him into or around Wichita after a likely strike would have been worse. A few minutes later, 2 more callers from the north side of the city reported blast damage, widespread glass, visible fires, and traffic locking solid on Interstate 135 going north. Somebody in Newton said the hospital there was already getting cars pulling in with face cuts and lacerated arms from shattered windows. I repeated that anybody northbound from Wichita needed to get off open road if at all possible, and shelter in a solid structure before worrying about mileage. The scanner traffic around then became a lesson in how fast a modern region can stop functioning. Units calling for direction from dispatch that no longer had clear direction to give. Fire crews being sent to automatic alarms in commercial strips while private calls about injured children stacked up. A county emergency manager asking for school keys and building status because local shelters were filling beyond planned capacity. Highway patrol trying to clear ramps where cars had run dry because people never fuel up until the gauge scares them. Somebody from a water district asking whether to isolate storage tanks because contamination fears were already spreading by rumor. I kept one ear on it and one ear on the phones and tried to turn the mess into usable language. If you are not injured, do not drive to a hospital just because you are afraid. Hospitals are for trauma right now. If you have a basement and potable water, use it. If you are in a church or school, stay put unless the building is damaged. Do not crowd doorways. Do not keep opening exterior doors because one cousin is still coming. Every time you open them, you trade shielding for a maybe. A nurse from Hutchinson, maybe the same one as before, called back from an emergency department and said they had dozens of glass injuries, crush injuries from panic falls, and at least one person badly burned after going outside to watch a flash and then trying to drive. She asked me to repeat one sentence exactly. People are getting hurt because they keep moving after the warning. I repeated it exactly. Then I added one of my own. Stop chasing the story. The story has already reached you. Around 1:15, the eastern horizon stayed dirty with light. Not one source, several. Some of it could have been fires. Some of it could have been electrical substations letting go. Some of it may have been strikes farther off than the ones we could name. I did not speculate much on air, because speculation starts to sound like information once people are frightened enough. Still, there was no hiding the fact that the map was changing. Callers from the Kansas City side were failing more often. Nebraska lines were mostly dead. One broken network segment mentioned Offutt by name in a sentence that cut out before the damage assessment came through. That made sense. Command and control sites go high on any enemy list. So do bomber bases and submarine facilities and missile fields. What people who have not thought about nuclear war sometimes miss is how wide the effects spread even when you are not the bullseye. A base gets hit, then highways jam in 3 counties. Fuel disappears in 2 hours. Phone towers overload. Hospitals 3 towns away fill with injuries that are not from radiation at all, but from glass, wrecks, falls, panic, burns, and stupid decisions made fast. Small towns that thought they were off the map find out they were only near the map. I kept telling listeners in rural places not to treat their distance from big cities as immunity. If the wind carried contamination, if nearby military infrastructure took a hit, if utilities failed, if rail choke points locked up, then a county of 10,000 could feel the same hard edge as a city of 500,000. Different scale, same break. One of the more useful calls came from a man who worked maintenance at a middle school in Salina. He had keys, he had generators for the emergency hallway lights, and he had maybe 60 people showing up because word had spread that the building basement was open. He asked me what to prioritize because folks were arguing about everything from prayer circles to gas masks to whether to shut themselves in separate classrooms. I told him to think in very plain layers. Account for who is inside. Keep everybody away from exterior windows and doors. Put the deepest rooms and the basement center space first, not corners by stairwells that lead outside. Use taped paper signs if you have to so people stop wandering. Set one toilet plan. Set one water plan. Keep doors closed. Put battery radios and flashlights in the center, not at the perimeter. Get outer coats and shoes that might have dust on them farther from where children sit. Do not let 10 different men become 10 bosses. You need one list and one voice. He listened without interrupting. Then he said in the most regular, tired Kansas voice I ever heard, "All right, That I can do. That line helped me too. Regular competence. A janitor with keys and decent sense can matter more in a crisis than 5 officials with dead phones. 10 minutes later, he called back and said they had 112 people in the building, a nurse, 2 volunteer firefighters, a church deacon, and enough bottled water for the rest of the night if nobody got stupid. I put that on air because people needed examples of order, not just examples of collapse. At 1:32, somebody started pounding on the station front door, hard enough to shake the glass. I muted the mic, grabbed the flashlight, and went to the hall with my pulse banging in my ears. Through the side pane, I saw a deputy I knew by face, if not by name, plus a woman in a denim jacket holding a blanket around a little boy. No threat. Just people who had run out of good options. I let them in fast and locked it again. The deputy's patrol car had half the light bar out and dust all over one side. He said the county emergency shelter nearest us had filled, another had no key holder, and the courthouse basement was taking only people already in town because the square was getting too crowded. He wanted to use our landline, and he wanted the woman and her boy inside a structure with concrete block walls until he could move again. I pointed him to the office phone and brought them into the back room where the file storage was thickest. The boy did not cry. He just stared at the generator light on the wall like it was a TV. The deputy came back from the call looking older than when he entered. He said the sheriff's office had maybe half normal contact with surrounding counties, and no one above them was giving anything close to a real operational picture. He asked if I was staying on air. I said yes. He looked toward the studio, then toward the dark front windows, and said that might be the best thing anybody in this building was doing tonight. Then he left, because there are men who keep moving when the map says stop. After that, I started using the broadcast, not just for warning, but for short family relay. I kept it tight, no long messages, nothing that turned into chatter, just practical location notes from people who were alive and sheltered and needed somebody listening in another town to know it. Mark and Lena from Newton are in the basement of the old brick church on Pine. 2 children with them, both safe. Tom from near Ellenwood reached the co-op storage office and has 6 with him. No room for more. Maria in South Salina is at the elementary school shelter and asking her sister in McPherson not to get on the road. I know some radio men would have refused that because it blurs the line between news and personal business. That night the line was useless. Phones were failing. Cell towers were overloaded. If I had a working transmitter and a region of people straining to hear anything familiar, then a short message saying somebody was alive counted as public service. It also gave me cleaner information about where shelters had actually formed, which mattered. Over the next hour, I built a rough map on paper from those calls. Schools with basements, churches with stone lower levels, courthouses, community centers, 1 feed store with a concrete storm room, 2 machine shops, a clinic, a water treatment building that was taking staff families only. I repeated the verified locations in general terms without turning them into traffic magnets. That balance was hard. Tell enough people to help. Not so many that one building gets mobbed and fails. At 1:47, the federal feed shifted again, and this is where the public message got a lot less hopeful. No more talk of rapid response or restoration. The Voice, a different one this time, said rescue resources were being prioritized by local survivability and strategic necessity. That is bureaucratic language for this. If your town was not already functioning and reachable, nobody was coming soon. The message told local jurisdictions to assume prolonged self-shelter. It specifically warned against spontaneous evacuation after detonations due to fallout risk and transportation failure. That one mattered so much I read it 3 times. Do not self-evacuate after a detonation unless your present shelter is on fire, structurally failing, or otherwise immediately lethal. People hear blast and think run. With fallout, run can turn into exposure fast. If the burst kicked up enough earth and debris, radioactive particles start dropping downwind, and a family out in the car with vents open can do worse than a family in a basement they hate. I told listeners if you were already in a decent shelter and the building was intact, hold your nerve. Boredom and fear are not emergencies. Fire, collapse, heavy smoke, severe injury, those are emergencies. A man in a grain elevator office outside Hutchinson argued with me that his concrete structure was high and solid and therefore good. I told him height does not help if the walls are thin and the roof is light compared to a basement under masonry. Better than a pickup, worse than a proper cellar. He swore, thanked me, and said he was moving his crew to the old bank next door. Good. That is a man making a better decision with bad options. That night was built from thousands of those. By 2 o'clock, the roads around us had changed character. Early panic driving gave way to stranded vehicles, scattered wrecks, and stretches of highway that were technically passable, but practically dead because people were afraid of what was ahead or behind them. Truckers gave the best road reports because truckers keep talking when everything else quits. One man, hauling feed westbound on Interstate 70, said there were cars abandoned near the shoulder outside Solomon, with doors open, lights still on, no people in sight. Maybe because they had run into nearby buildings, maybe because they had just walked. Another said a chain collision near a ramp east of Salina had blocked one lane with nobody directing traffic because patrol units were tied up elsewhere. A woman driving from Lawrence toward family in central Kansas called from somewhere west of Topeka and said the eastern sky behind her had a low red glare, and every rest stop she passed was overflowing. I asked if she had any solid place immediately near. She said a travel plaza and a motel. I told her the motel interior hallway or bathroom, away from outside walls, was better than chasing another 50 miles in fear. She started to argue. I cut her off. I said in a tone I had not used all night that the open highway was now more dangerous than the building beside her. She went silent, then said, "All right." I hated that I had to be harsh, but some people hear calm advice as optional. They hear command better. Crisis pulls that out of you. The odd thing about staying on air through a national disaster is how local the details remain. While somewhere high over the continent, missiles and interceptors and command aircraft were doing whatever men designed them to do, my actual job at that moment included telling a woman in Lyons that her dog could come into the cellar too, telling a man in a school gym not to keep opening the exterior door every time his brother texted maybe, and telling half a dozen people that no, they should not drive to a pharmacy in another town just because they forgot one bottle of vitamins. One old farmer called from near Marquette and asked in a perfectly serious voice whether canned peaches stored in the garage were still safe if the garage had no insulation. I asked if the cans were sealed and intact, and whether the garage had visible dust blowing through. He said yes to sealed, no to visible dust. I told him the bigger problem was getting himself into the best shelter first. The peaches could wait. He chuckled once, nervous, and said he guessed he had known that. That is what people do when the scale gets too large. They hold on to one can of peaches because it is something their brain can lift. I never mocked that. The brain needs handles. At 2:13, the engineer from our tower site called in over the service line. He had driven there before the roads got too bad because he wanted to confirm our backup fuel and transmission chain were stable. He said the tower was still standing. The building had taken a power surge, but no fire, and we had enough diesel for several more hours if the generator at the site did not start leaking under load. He also said he had a clean view of the horizon from higher ground, and had seen at least 3 major light events in different directions over the last hour. One east, one south-southeast, one far north. That lined up with the pattern we were already building from callers and broken network pieces. He did not give me poetry. He gave me exactly what mattered. Flashes, bearings, delayed rumbles, utility failures afterward. That is how men talk when they know the difference between drama and report. I told him to bunker at the tower site if he had to. He said the equipment shelter walls were thick enough, and he had water and a battery radio. Good. We ended it there. Then I turned back to the audience and explained in plain terms why our signal might be carrying farther than usual that night. After dark, under the right conditions, an amplitude-modulated signal can ride and reflect in ways daytime listeners do not hear. That meant there were people far beyond our usual county pattern, maybe picking up my voice through static and darkness. So I widened the scope of what I repeated. Not too wide, just enough that a ranch house farther out or a truck cab 2 states over might catch the bones of it. One of the hardest sections of the night came when the first people started calling from inside damaged areas, but not from direct ground zero. Those were the worst to listen to, because they still had enough connection to describe what had happened. A paramedic north of Wichita said she had been off duty at home when the flash came and the windows failed inward. She and a neighbor were pulling people from houses with glass injuries, smoke inhalation, and one partial collapse from a garage roof. She did not ask for advice. She asked me to tell anyone listening not to drive into the city looking for family, because roads were jammed with debris and responders could barely move. I put that on air right away. Another caller from a suburb east of the base said there were car alarms everywhere, transformers blowing, and small fires nobody could reach because hydrant pressure had dropped. A man from near Junction City got through in bursts and said there was major damage in town, and everybody was trying to go somewhere different at once. The call clipped so badly I could not keep him on long. What I could do was draw the lesson out loud. If you are in a place that has already taken blast effects, you may feel pulled to drive toward help. The hard truth is that help may be farther from you than you think, and the road itself may now be the trap. The most useful thing some people could do was stabilize where they were, stop bleeding, keep everybody inside a heavier structure, and wait out the first contamination window before making bigger moves. By 2:30, I stepped out of the studio long enough to check the building air system, because one of the federal notices finally addressed shelter ventilation in plain language. If your system brings in outside air, reduce or shut that intake if you can do it safely. So I walked the hall with the flashlight and found the manual dampers in the utility closet, dust in my nose, generator vibration under my boots, the whole place smelling faintly of warm electronics and diesel. The woman and little boy in the file room were asleep against the wall with a blanket around them. The outer office glass had cracked in one corner from the earlier shock. No major breach. Good enough. I closed the fresh air damper down to a minimum setting and taped a paper note over the thermostat so nobody would try to fix the stale air by turning the fan up. On the way back, I cracked the side emergency door only an inch and looked out. The town was dark except for scattered house lights on backup power and the occasional sweep of headlights moving too fast or too slow. Sirens sounded in pieces now, not one steady chorus, more like isolated units chasing isolated problems. The eastern horizon was still brighter than it should have been. South had a low, dirty glow, too. I shut the door, locked it, and went back to the mic. I told listeners who had forced air systems to check if they could stop outside intake without killing heat in freezing conditions. I told them if they did not know how, do not start disassembling furnaces in the dark. Keep sheltering, and avoid making a second emergency inside the first one. A doctor from a small hospital outside Hutchinson managed to get through on a patched line from someone's personal handset. He was not dramatic. He sounded annoyed, which I respected. He said people were starting to show up asking for radiation pills they did not have, demanding scans they could not perform, and crowding hallways while staff were trying to manage real trauma. He wanted one message out hard and clear. Potassium iodide is not a magic shield. It helps in limited circumstances for certain radioactive iodine exposure, and only when taken correctly. It does not stop gamma radiation. It does not make a road trip safe. It does not turn a garage into a bunker. I repeated that carefully and made sure I said I was relaying a physician's instruction. Then he added another point people needed. If you come in from outside and think dust may be on your skin or clothes, removing outer clothing can eliminate a large portion of contamination before it spreads indoors. That is a useful act. I said that too, and I said it without turning it into a sterile lecture. Folks, take the jacket off at the door if you are outside in drifting dust. Bag it if you can. Wash off. Keep the dirt away from kids and bedding. That is the level most people needed. Not a textbook. Just one next right move. The farther the night went, the less I trusted any single national picture, so I kept pulling the lens back to the region and the room-size decisions inside it. A man in a basement in Great Bend wanted to know if his wife should keep the sump pump on because the cellar took on water in spring storms. I said if the pump outlet vented outside and the pump well was already active, yes, better to manage flooding than lose the shelter, but do not stand by the outside wall fiddling with it. Another caller in a church near McPherson asked whether opening the building to more people was wise if they were already crowded. I told him crowding is bad, but turning people back into the open at that hour could be worse.
Use interior hallways, rotate people away from doors, keep children low and centered, and for God's sake stop letting every new arrival drag in lawn chairs and half a garage full of nonsense. He laughed once, tired, and said that was exactly what was happening. There is always a man with a cooler full of useless stuff. There is always a man who thinks he can carry comfort through a collapse on 2 arms and no plan. You cannot. You carry water, medicine, light, and people. The rest can wait. At 2:58, I got the call that probably kept me at the mic for the rest of the night without any more real debate. It came from a boy, maybe 15 or 16, in a shelter room at a school somewhere between Salina and Manhattan. He had gotten hold of a teacher's phone on one bar of service. He was trying to find out whether anyone had heard from his father, who drove nights on the interstate. I could not help him directly. I told him no, I did not have a name list from road crews or hospitals, and I was sorry. He swallowed hard and asked if I would say his dad's truck description on air in case the man was listening. Blue tractor, white trailer, company out of Kansas City, heading west before midnight. I almost said no because I did not want to turn the broadcast into a lost and found board. Then I heard the room behind him. Not loud, just a crowd breathing in a basement. I said the description on air. 10 minutes later, a trucker west of Salina called in and said he had seen a rig matching that description, parked beside a closed farm equipment dealership with a group sheltering inside. Same company markings. Driver alive, helping an older couple with a cut arm. I put that on air too. I hope it reached the boy. I never found out. But that kind of thing matters. It is not personal drama. It is the real texture of a mass emergency. Not just missiles in cities. Sons trying to find out if a cab with a blue door made it off the road. A little after 3, the sky to the north flickered low and wide, too far to give us a clean shock and too ugly to ignore. That could have been Nebraska. Could have been farther. Could have been a line of infrastructure failure. What mattered was the pattern. This was not one exchange over and done. This was continuing. Another federal cut-in confirmed additional impacts in multiple regions and warned that communication disruptions would worsen before stabilizing, if they stabilized at all. There was language in there about continuity of government and retaliatory operations, but none of that changed what a family in a Kansas basement had to do. Stay put. Reduce outside exposure. Conserve water. Keep radios running. Tend wounds. Watch for fire. That was the whole game at human scale. I said on air that there was no prize for moving first, and no honor in dying on a highway trying to outrun a map you do not actually have. I said if you had a decent shelter, your job now was patience. Patience is a rough order for Americans. We are movement people, task people, wheel-turning people. But nuclear fallout does not care if you feel useless. The first hours belong to shelter and waiting. That is not cowardice. That is the physics of the thing. Heavy material between your body and the outside. Time for radiation levels to fall. Airborne particles settling where you are not standing.
That is survival, plain and ugly. The deputy came back at 3:20 with fresh dust on his boots and blood on one sleeve that did not look like his. He said a shelter south of town had taken in twice what it could handle, and tempers were getting bad. He also said there were already men out trying to siphon fuel from abandoned vehicles, which told me some percentage of the population had moved straight from fear into opportunism before the first night was even half over. That is not surprising. It is just disgusting. He used our landline again, drank half a bottle of water standing up, and asked whether the state feed had said anything about National Guard mobilization. I told him only in broad terms. He shook his head and said broad terms were not going to stop anybody from shooting over diesel by dawn. Then he went back out. After he left, I told listeners to keep vehicles out of sight if possible, not because a car was worth dying over, but because desperation plus rumor plus darkness makes bad men faster. I told shelters to set one entry point and one person to control it if they had the bodies to spare. Do not keep all exterior doors unlocked because you feel guilty. Guilt is not security. I hated saying that too. But by then we were past the stage where every stranger at the door could be treated as harmless. That is what the first night of collapse does. It turns neighborliness into a risk calculation faster than decent people want to admit. Around 3:35, a call came in from a machine shop north of Newton, where maybe 20 people had holed up after the Wichita strike. The owner had welding curtains, concrete floors, a break room in the center, and one old battery radio. He wanted to know if they should crack a bay door because folks were complaining about stale air and fear was building. I asked if there was smoke in the building, fuel vapor, or visible contamination drifting outside. He said no smoke, just human smell and nerves. I told him keep the door shut. Stale air with living people is better than exchanging whatever is outside for a little comfort. Use short, supervised trips to a restroom if needed. Keep people off the exterior walls. Rotate sitting space. Give everybody one simple task if they are starting to spiral. Count water. Count bandages. Write names. Check children. Keeping hands busy saves minds. He said he could do that. Then he asked me to tell people north of Wichita that if they could not reach a formal shelter, and if they knew a solid shop building with interior rooms, that was where some of them were surviving the night. I gave the message without naming him. A cinder block room full of regular people trying not to lose it. That is what the nation sounded like by then. There was a stretch after 4 where the calls thinned. Not because things got better, because systems were dying and people were settling into whatever shelter choice they had made. The room got quiet enough that I could hear the generator fan and the small clicks of cooling metal inside the console rack. I took a swallow of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier and tasted nothing. The little boy in back woke up and asked the woman with him if it was morning yet. She said not yet. I heard it through the hall and had to look down at the map for a second before I trusted my own voice again. Then I went back on and used the quiet to lay out the clearest survival instructions of the night, all in one run, slow enough for people writing it down. Stay inside. Go to the basement or center of the heaviest building available. Keep away from windows and exterior doors. Shut down outside air intake if you can do it safely. Remove outer clothes if somebody comes in from outside exposure. Bag them away from living space. Wash skin and hair with soap and water if possible. Use stored or covered food and water. Do not drive unless your shelter is immediately unsafe. Hospitals are for severe injuries. Keep a battery radio on. Expect bad information. Trust what you can verify close to home. Fire, structural damage, and contamination are the first threats. Shortages and bad human behavior come next. I said that whole thing twice. By then I was not trying to sound smooth, I was trying to sound unforgettable. A farmer from outside Ellsworth called just before 4:20 to say a fine dust had started showing on the hood of his truck where it sat under a porch overhang. He was not near a direct strike zone, so I asked him careful questions. Was it blowing from the road? Was there smoke? Was there ash from a grass fire? He said no road traffic, no known fire nearby, and the dust had a pale, gritty look that was not normal dirt. I did not jump to declaring fallout because guessing wrong on air in that moment would have caused a stampede in 100 basements. What I did say was this: if you are seeing unusual dust or fine particulate outside after confirmed detonations in the region, treat the outside environment with caution. Do not send children out to look. Do not shake contaminated clothing indoors. Keep animals inside if possible. If you must go out for a life safety reason, cover up as much skin as practical and come back in fast. Then decontaminate as best you can. Later, another caller south of Salina reported something similar on a vehicle windshield after the wind shifted slightly. That was enough for me to harden the warning without pretending I had a lab in the studio. Possible contaminated particulate is moving in parts of central Kansas. Stay under cover. That is what I said. Sometimes honest uncertainty is safer than false certainty. You say what you know. You say what the consequence of being wrong is. Then you steer people toward the more survivable choice. Toward 4:30, I finally heard from a state emergency management voice that sounded local instead of distant federal relay. She was tired, her line was noisy, and she was reading from notes fast because she had too much to push through too little pipe. She confirmed multiple impacts in the central United States, severe communications disruption, and widespread transportation impairment. She told county authorities to plan for at least 72 hours of reduced outside assistance. 72 hours. That was the first concrete number I heard all night that felt aimed at regular people instead of institutions. 3 days. 3 days before normal help might even begin to sort itself. I read that back in a way listeners could feel. Folks, plan for 3 days where it is just you, the people in your shelter, and whatever you already have in arm's reach. After that message, the calls about evacuation mostly stopped. People finally understood there was no convoy of order already on the way. A man in a church shelter asked if they should ration water immediately or wait until daylight. I said ration now, but do it sensibly. Set a schedule. Do not let fear turn into hoarding inside the room. That causes fights. Fights burn energy and trust is short enough already. I had become, without wanting it, part dispatcher, part damage control, part shelter referee for a region of strangers. The eastern glow started to flatten a little after 5, either because fires were burning lower or because whatever was in the upper air had spread and the whole horizon was turning to a duller wash. Dawn was trying to come in behind it. It did not look like a clean Kansas dawn. The sky had a gray-brown cast in places, and the first natural light showed a layer of fine grit on the outside ledge of the side door window. That answered some questions I had been avoiding. Something had come through the air overnight. How hot it was, how dangerous at our exact spot I could not measure. But it was there. I told people daylight did not mean safety. Daylight just meant you could see the mess better. I said if you made it through the first night in decent shelter, the temptation to step out at dawn and check damage would be strong. Fight that temptation. First morning after detonation is still first day shelter time unless you are dealing with fire, collapse, or severe medical need. A man from a courthouse basement in a small town west of us said half the people downstairs wanted to go home at first light because they were tired and cramped and nothing had happened right there. I told him to put me on speaker if he had to. I said into the mic that nothing visible at your doorway does not mean nothing is there. Radiation does not announce itself with a siren at your porch. Stay put. Just after 5:10, I got a call from a pair of brothers in a feed warehouse office outside Hutchinson. They had spent the night with 6 others and a portable radio, and now one of the older men with them was pushing to leave because he wanted to check his cattle. I know that sounds small to somebody in a city, but in Kansas, cattle are not a hobby. They are loans, livelihoods, family work, whole years of a man's back. Still, I told them the truth. Livestock can wait longer than an unshielded body should. If the man walked out now because he could not stand not knowing, he might be trading animals for radiation exposure and bringing contamination back in on boots and clothes. One of the brothers laughed in a tired, rough way and said that was exactly the argument. He thanked me and said they would sit on the old man if they had to. That is the thing about real disasters. They are not made only of giant decisions. They are made of 10,000 stubborn small ones, all tied to something a person loves or owes or cannot bear to lose. I never did get a clean count of what had been hit before sunrise. No one in a little radio room in Kansas was going to have that. But by the first light, I knew enough. The military had taken hits. Major facilities in the region had taken hits. Wichita had been damaged badly. Fort Riley area had taken some kind of major strike or strike effect. The East and North had suffered hard enough that their communications were broken and their sky had glowed all night. Roads were fouled. Hospitals were stretched. State authorities were talking in 72-hour windows. Fine particulate had reached at least parts of central Kansas. That was the picture I could defend. So that was the picture I gave. I refused a dozen rumors that tried to pile on. No, I was not going to tell listeners Denver was gone because one frightened man said so. No, I was not confirming foreign paratroopers in Missouri or poison gas in Topeka or a second sun over Oklahoma. People invent action when the real thing is too big and too slow between blows. I stayed with what had names, directions, and consequences. That might sound limited. Limited is how you keep people alive. The woman in the back room finally came into the studio around 5:30, with the boy still wrapped in the blanket. She did not ask to speak. She just stood by the wall and listened. The child asked me if the war was over. I told him no, not yet. But his job was simple. Stay inside. Listen to his mom. Drink water when she says. Keep shoes on. Do not touch outside dust. He nodded because children can accept a clear order when adults cannot. The woman thanked me once, quiet, and went back out. I did not put that on air. Some things stay in the room. What I did put on air was a steady repetition of practical next steps for morning shelter operations. Check the building for cracks, smoke, and water intrusion without sending people fully outside if you can avoid it. Set one controlled sanitation plan. Separate anyone badly injured for focused care. Keep children occupied with quiet tasks. Conserve flashlight batteries by using them only when needed. Write names, conditions, and supply counts on paper in case communications fail completely. If you have a battery-powered vehicle radio and enough shielding around you to use it briefly, keep it as a backup receiver, not as a getaway machine. Think in hours now, not minutes. By then I had been talking most of the night with only quick breaks to swallow water and check equipment. My voice had roughened. The room smelled of diesel, dust, and old paper. Outside, dawn had fully arrived and the parking lot was showing damage I could not see before. Hairline fractures in the front glass, fine grit along the curb. One of the station vans had a shattered side mirror, maybe from debris, maybe from the earlier shock. The town itself stayed unnervingly still. No morning commuters, no school buses, no easy signs of routine. Just a couple of slow vehicles moving with purpose, and one column of dark smoke on the eastern edge where I could not tell if it was a warehouse fire or something worse. I looked at the road for maybe 3 seconds and understood something very plain. Getting in my car and trying to run at first light would not turn me into a survivor. It would turn me into one more man on damaged roads with partial information and a weak destination. In the building I had thick walls, backup power, a transmitter, maps, lines that still sometimes opened, and a region of listeners who had already built part of their night around this voice. Staying was not brave. Staying made more practical sense. So I stayed. I told the audience I was still here, and I was not shutting down unless the building failed, the fuel ran out, or the transmitter chain died for good. I told them the first night had ended, but the emergency had not. Morning would make some people reckless because daylight feels like permission. Do not let it. Keep sheltering. Keep your people inside. Keep a written list of who was with you at dawn and who needed medicine, wound care, or special attention. Do not burn fuel on hope drives. Do not send one man out because he is restless and claims he will be right back. Restless men become missing men fast. If you have a radio and you can hear me, check your supplies now without opening the door. Count water, count food, count bandages, count batteries, count children, count older folks, count insulin, count inhalers, count every bottle and every can, because by the first afternoon, arguments will start from bad memory if you do not. I said all that in one run, and then I took the next call, because there was always another one. A church in Salina asking about latrine setup with no running water. A farm family near Marquette asking whether well water from a sealed system was safer than rain barrels. A shelter in a machine shop asking what to do with one panicking man who kept insisting he needed to get to the interstate. That is what the first morning of nuclear war sounded like in Kansas. Not speeches, not flags, not grand strategy. Just regular people in basements and back rooms and school corridors trying to get the next decision a little less wrong than the last one. If you are hearing this part of the story from some future place where the roads are open and the lights work, and people once again complain about small things with full confidence that tomorrow exists, understand this much. The first night was not one giant flash and silence. It was a long grind of partial facts, practical choices, and ordinary human voices trying to stay human, while systems bigger than them broke overhead. Men still worried about cattle. Women still counted diapers. Kids still asked if mourning meant safe. Deputies still drove county roads.
Nurses still triaged people cut by glass. Janitors still opened school basements. Truckers still reported the lanes. Mechanics still turned keys in generators. None of that stopped because the war started. That is what made it real. Life did not pause for history. History shoved itself into kitchens, church halls, machine shops, courthouse basements, and one little radio room in Kansas. And everybody inside those places had to keep doing the next thing with whatever they had in reach. That was the first night. That was the truth of it. And when the next alert tone came through just after sunrise, thin and ugly through the backup speaker, I leaned back into the mic, looked at the map one more time, and kept talking.